Welcome to the Regina A. Quick Center for the Arts. Please turn off all cellular phones and other electronic noisemakers. Photography and video recording is prohibited in the theater. Thank you for your cooperation. Also, please make note of the nearest exit in case of an emergency. Thank you for joining us today.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott Jarzombek. I am the town librarian for Fairfield, and I welcome to what is always the most anticipated event of the Fairfield Public Library's One Book, One Town program. It's our evening with the author. On January 10th, we made the announcement that for the first time in the history of the program, the selection committee had chosen a book that was written by a Fairfield resident. This deeply personal account about the death by suicide of a beloved son was not just a tragedy for the family, but also felt throughout the community. We would not have been able to choose this book without the generosity and bravery of Ivan and Meg, who gave us the permission to present I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye to the town for this program. Conversations are an essential part of One Book, One Town. Since choosing this book, we have been so honored to participate in meaningful conversations with our patrons about what reading the book has meant to them. And we'd like to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences with us. It is also important to note that without the generosity of the Friends of the Fairfield Public Library and our donors, programming like this would not be possible. We also want to extend a special thanks to our partner, Fairfield University, for hosting us in this wonderful venue. We also want to recognize our community partners, Fairfield University Bookstore, Sacred Heart University, Pequot Library, and the Fairfield Museum and History Center. And I also would like to acknowledge the multiple elected officials in the audience and who were with us earlier. We appreciate the support they give both this event and our public library. And lastly, I want to recognize the committee and staff who put in a tremendous amount of work to make all of this happen. Specifically, Claudia Silk and Mary Coe. You both, I think they're in the back, you both make me incredibly proud of our library and an example of why I am lucky to lead such an incredible organization. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to leave it over to Claudia, who's going to do introductions.
Hey, everybody. What a great crowd. It's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Ivan Maisel. Ivan is Vice President, Editorial, and Senior Writer at On3.com. He has covered college football for nearly 4 decades, from 2002 to 2021 as a senior writer for ESPN, where he wrote for ESPN.com, appearing on television, ESPN radio, and on podcasts. He also served as editor-at-large for ESPN College Football 150. Prior to joining ESPN, Maisel covered national college football for Sports Illustrated, Newsday, and the Dallas Morning News. He has been honored 8 times for Best Story by the Football Writers Association of America, and twice by the Associated Press Sports Editors, which in 2019 named him one of the 10 best sport columnists. Maisel earned a bachelor's degree in American Studies from Stanford University. Ivan is joined in conversation with his longtime friend and fellow Fairfield resident, Armin Katayan. Mr. Catane is an 11-time Emmy Award winner. He told me not to do all this, but I'm gonna. With a decorated print and broadcast career spanning nearly 40 years. From 2013 to March of 2017, he was the lead correspondent for 60 Minutes Sports. From 2006 to 12, he was the chief investigative correspondent for CBS News, winning multiple awards. Prior to that, he was a special features reporter for CBS Sports, a correspondent for HBO's Real Sports, and a correspondent for ABC News World News Tonight. He began his career as a sports and feature writer in San Diego. A native of Michigan, he graduated cum laude in '76 with a BA in journalism from San Diego State, where he was the starting shortstop for the Aztecs. That was important for Scott to include. So, gentlemen, thank you so much, and the stage is yours.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming. Ivan and I date back to 1982. In fact, I remember the day like it was yesterday, June 6, 1982. And we started as reporters at Sports Illustrated in New York City, which were basically in those days were glorified fact checkers for the magazine.
Not glorified.
No, they were hardcore. Trying to push our way up the masthead, and Ivan became a very, very integral part of the magazine's college football coverage. I became the magazine's top investigative reporter at the time. As was said before, Ivan is a tremendous storyteller, a fabulous reporter, and recognized as one of the top college football writers of his generation. Which brings me, kind of, Ivan, to our first question and Max's story in this book. One I know that you could never have imagined that you would write. And so why did you write it, and how did it help?
Well, first of all, thank everybody for being here. It's a real thrill. And it's going to be a little bit of a PTI format at the end of the show. I don't know if you watch PTI, but at the end of this, Meg is going to stand up and tell us what I got wrong. So.
And my wife, Dee Dee, is sitting right next to her, so it's a 2-for-1 thing tonight.
Yeah, I didn't, well, first of all, Armin, to get very basic, I best communicate by typing. I'm much better at that, at getting out my feelings than I am speaking. And in the early days after Max died, that's how and if you read the book, you know this, and I hope I don't continually say that, but, I would wake up at 4 in the morning and just pour whatever was in my heart into my laptop and then close it, and I felt better. And that stuff just sat there, and I only did that for about a year to 18 months. And it was just there, and I knew at some point I would come back to it, but I didn't want to write a book where hey, let me tell you about my kid. Every parent is proud of their child, and if I felt like if I wrote that book, that was about me. But what I realized was, having been so bad at grieving myself and having been so bad at comforting people who are grieving, once I was on the other side of the equation and could see what it felt like and know how awkward it was for people to talk to me, talk to us, my family. If I could be a docent, for grief and try to explain to people, this is what this felt like, and this is what was helpful, this is what was not helpful, then it would help not just people who are grieving, although we all become grievers at some point in our lives, but it would help people to comfort their friends who are grieving. And so then I had a purpose to write.
I keep trying to catch his eye. It's such a provocative title to a book. Just how did you come to that title?
Well, so home photo on my phone is of our 3 children at our oldest daughter's graduation, and 2 or 3 years after, it was probably 3 years after Max died, I was just looking at the photo one day, and the girls are looking right at the camera, and Max is doing he's looking over here somewhere. He hated to have his photo taken, which was pretty funny because he was a photographer. But he wanted to be on the other side of the camera. He didn't want anybody to pay any attention to him. So I was just looking at the photo and thinking, hey, look over here. Look over here. So I keep trying to catch his eye.
We have friends who had a son, Jack, who about 15 years ago, the same age as Max, 21, died of a drug overdose. I spoke at the memorial, and I just kept thinking there's no pill, there's no potion that you can take, there's no cure that you can look towards and an answer. And in so many ways, your book is so profound in your search for that answer. And I'm just wondering, that path, help people understand the path that you took. I know, it's a 300-page book, so it's a long path, but just to give us a sense of what your journey was like.
Well, I'll say this, Armin. From 8 years on, I forget how long it took. Because now you can read the book in a few days, and you've taken the journey. But I waited to write the book until I felt my feet were under me, and I really didn't. I started writing the book 5 years after Max died. I think I probably, I don't know, probably 3 years. I was functioning fairly quickly afterwards. Probably within I say functioning. I didn't feel like I was beaten up every day. Probably a year out. But I had to wait to write until I could view it with a sort of journalistic, with a journalistic eye. I don't, it's interesting. I'm not really answering your question. I'll put it this way. A month ago today, we buried my mother, who was 95. And I have had feelings in the last month that are, they're not the same, obviously, for obvious reasons. My mother was 95 years old, and we were very lucky. She had a long and wonderful life. But that sort of inability to focus and just sort of staring off into space, I haven't felt that. And that sort of has brought me back to where I was in the first few months after Max died.
I mean, so much of our job is peeling away layer after layer of a story and trying to get to some sort of sense of truth. How hard was that for you? Because you peel one layer away and you're exposing certain things about yourself. You peel another layer away, and you're like, oh, okay, that's me as a parent. Just how painful and revelatory, I guess, was it for you?
It was interesting. I kind of figured out early on there was nothing I could say in how I reacted to people or how I approached to people that, as painful as the assessment might be, the self-assessment might be, it was nothing as painful as actually Max's death. So in that sense, it was not so bad.
Yeah.
I started out really the week Max disappeared, and as I said in the book, it became evident to me very quickly that I was honesty was going to be the best way to go, because and that meant I didn't really try to sugarcoat anything with myself, and I didn't hit people over the head with what happened, but I didn't shy away from it, and I just felt like if that made them uncomfortable, that was their issue. They were never going to be as uncomfortable as I was. So, and the facts are facts. I mean, it was tragic and awful and horrible, and but I wasn't going to pretend it didn't happen.
But it takes a while to get to that place. No?
Well, the problem with no, I felt like, then I was going to have to remember who knew what.
Yeah.
Then I've got to think, who are we telling? If we're only going to tell certain people certain things, then I need a list, and I have to check you off. Okay, I'm telling you what now? You're a second cousin, or you're a friend, you're a college friend, And again, I just felt like I had enough to deal with. I was just going to, put it out there. And
Ivan, there's a phrase in this book that I know it took you a long time to get to, but all grief is personal, all grief is individual. Grief is the purest form of love to someone who is no longer here to express that back. I mean, I've read that thing. I read it yesterday, I read it this morning. How long did it take you to, comprehend that and then construct? It's like grief is love. And that is such, I think if there is a second title to this book, it's Grief is Love.
yeah, I thought about that as a title, and I didn't want to have grief in the title because as every editor but one said to me that read the proposal, this is lovely, but people don't really buy books about grief. So, yeah. And my agent kept saying, it only takes one.
It only takes one.
So,
Yeah.
well, you know how this works. You write something and then the older I have gotten as a writer, the more I have come to believe that, what you leave out is what makes the story, and my editors at ESPN used to make fun of me because I kept saying, this is too long. I need to cut it down and cut it down. And they would say, well, you need to explain this. I said, no, they're reasonably, our readers are intelligent enough, they can connect those dots. And, that was part of it. And there is a popular saying out there, again, as I said in the book, that grief is the price we pay for love. And part of that was journalistic and me paring that down, but it was also the way I felt. I didn't want to feel like, paying a price is
a penalty.
Is a penalty, right. And the reason, and we all, especially as sports writers, work in metaphors and similes and trying to, make people understand what we've witnessed. So, no, I just felt like, okay, well, I loved him this much, and that's why I hurt so much. So it's the same thing, so once I got to that, it happened pretty fast.
But it's so interesting because grief is something that, like you say, people stiff arm it.
Oh, yeah.
We keep it away. And you did it for
55 years.
Yeah, 55 years. Your father's death.
Yeah.
At 81 and 07, and you were like, I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
And then Max just, you fall through, as you said, and I'll get to that in a second, but it's another one of the lines in the book, you just fell through a trap door. And I'm just like, we're sitting on this stage, and all of a sudden you just drop, and you don't know how far you're going to fall. And, I mean, that's what, to me, is so profound, too, is like, people they don't analyze grief, they don't, it's like, it just is so profound and it's so overwhelming. Like, what am I experiencing? And then you were like, no, you're stiff-arming it, you've got to deal with it. And that has to be, my God, what, you talk about a revelation or something that you're just going, oh.
Well, I mean, I am a,
You're your avoidance issues.
Yeah, I have avoidance issues. I have conflict avoidance issues, and I certainly have pain avoidance issues. So, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't avoid this. So, then it was, well, okay, how do I accustom myself to it? How am I going to get along with it? My mother, who was not an emotional person, my father was the emotional one of the two of them, but my mother said to me, and Passover's next week, it was right around Passover, and I called her from the parking lot of Trader Joe's, because I can remember sitting there, and she said to me, "It just is. This just is." And that sort of centered me on the idea of, okay, I can't stiff arm this, I can't outrun it, I have to deal with it. So then it's a question of, okay, it's just right here, and it's going to go everywhere I go, and how am I going to get used to that burden? And the poem I reference in the book, Edward Hirsch, about his son Gabriel, was a huge help. The notion that grief is a boulder you carry up a hill that never ends. And again, okay, this is just what you have, and you have to figure out how to deal with it, how to live with it, not deal with it, but just how to live with it. Okay, pick it up. Let's go.
Let's go. Mental illness, so long. I mean, we've covered college sports and professional sports for decades, and it's only now in the NCAA and in professional athletics and in high school, thank God, people are talking about the pressures and mental illness. And you and I both did stories on the Helinski family, Mark and Kim. So those of you in the audience that don't know, their son, Tyler, who was a starting star quarterback at Washington State, took his own life, suicide in January of 2018, and just, a bomb went off in the family at that point in time. Ivan did the first major stories for ESPN, both video and for the magazine. I did one for The Athletic where I went to South Carolina and spent time with Mark and Kim, and you can't spend 15 minutes with them and not understand, A, what they went through, but B, how they've used and taken Tyler's death into a crusade to help other people.
They've done magnificent work.
How did it affect you when you were with them, help you understand what happened to Max and help you move forward in any way, shape, or form?
Well, it was interesting when I went out to see them. They were in Orange County in California at the time, before their youngest son became a quarterback at South Carolina. He's now at Northwestern. Flying out there, I had my laptop and I opened up to read what I had written in those first, I saw them, he died in January, I went out in August, so those first 7 months of what I wrote, to see where my head was then. And they were, they were a mess.
They're a mess.
They were a mess.
That's the word I was going to use.
I don't want to be too technical, in how I describe it.
Yeah, a mess was exactly how I described it.
And people ask me questions about mental illness, and I go, I'm not an expert in mental illness. I'm an expert in one case of mental illness, but in this case, they were just so relieved to be able to talk to me because they knew I understood. And it was like they didn't see the cameras, and we just kind of sat and talked, and it was a comfort to them. It was a comfort to me, to know I can pay forward what people did for me. I had parents call me and reach out to me and to Meg in those first weeks and months after Max died. And this was, I didn't want, ESPN came to me right when Tyler died and wanted me to do a story, and I didn't want to do the police procedural. That would have been too harrowing for me. Again, I avoid pain. But this, I thought, I said to him, well, I can write about the parents because that's what I know why you're asking me to do the story. We both know why you're asking me to do the story. I can write about them. And thankfully, my editor, David Duffy, who is still a very close friend of mine, said, yeah, do that. And we went from there.
It's so funny as you're talking about the parents, and this was something I was going to ask later, but it came to me. I mean, as you know, Kim threw herself into Helinski's Hope. She showed me the room where they had all the caps and the T-shirts and everything. And Mark is just trying to figure out why Tyler did what he did.
Yeah.
And I thought about you and Meg. It's like Meg is up in Monroe County. She's with the sheriff's department. She's trying to find out what happened to Max and why it happened. And you're in a different place.
Yes.
And that's really important for people, I think, to understand is, and we're going to get to that in a little bit later, but you can't impose your own feelings or your own, this is how I'm going to handle it, so you have to handle it the same way.
Right. Yeah, sure. We're all individuals and we all grieve differently and we all do everything differently. And, David Kessler, who is the current expert on grief, talked about, it's not, couples, losing a child can end a marriage, and it was that very point that
It's not the death of a child that causes the split.
Yeah.
It's how the parents deal with the death of the child.
right, they judge. You can't judge one another's grief, and Meg and I have always been very giving each other a lot of space to do whatever we need to do. For instance, I don't need to make the bed, so, but Meg does, so I give her that space.
I got the bath mat thing tonight. I put the bath mat away all the time. Dee Dee goes, why don't you put the bath mat away? I'm like, I did it. She goes, no, I do it all the time. I was like, all right, okay, fine, you win.
But, I mean, seriously, you can't, I just found those guys, Mark and Kim were kind of the same way, and they have, but the one thing they did agree on was pouring their energies into their foundation, and the work they have done over, it's now 5 years, it has changed college athletics in this country, and it's really remarkable.
Let's step back for a second, and for those that in the audience that really don't know Max, he marched to the beat of a different drum,
Yeah.
to say the least. His love of photography, but just give people in the audience a sense of your son.
Well, Max was our middle child. From early on, he was different, and the psychiatry. He was tested constantly to the point, as I've recounted that. He started purposely failing the test because he just got sick of it, which part of me respected, actually. But he was different, and I just assumed that I would have a son who was as fanatic about sports as I was, and and he couldn't have cared less. I mean, ever. He did get interested in the NBA at one point because Lego made an NBA set, and we literally, as soon as he told me this, we literally drove to the late lamented Toys R Us in Westport and bought the Lego set, and then began going to Nets games because those were the closest easier ticket to get than the Knicks. But I tried to reach out to him with things that we would both enjoy. I introduced all three children at a very early age to the Marx Brothers and Looney Tunes, mostly as an excuse so I could watch them. And they, and he and I bonded over humor, and he had a terrific dry wit. But wherever he was, on the spectrum, and nobody could ever really give us a straight answer, he had trouble dealing with peers, and I think he led a pretty lonely existence. He found photography as a way to express himself, and anime he loved, and made his friends through anime and through video games. He had this whole community of friends across the continent. At least one was in Canada, that we, of course, in this modern age, knew nothing of. And that was of great comfort to learn that he did have this community of people that cared about him and that he cared about. And, because we, as every parent assumes, if you send your child to college, that they will find their people in college, as most of us did who went to college. And it turns out he found his people with on the internet with a headset on.
Yeah.
But that was nice.
So much of the book too, you write about how Max hid, so many of his thoughts and so much of his hopelessness at times. And reading the book, actually, the last couple of days again, I felt like you were trying to unlock, a box without a clue as to what the combination was in so many ways. And that, as a parent, we're always gauging, how are our kids doing? And is that kind of how you felt for a while? Is that you were, as much as you love Max, you're still trying to figure him out, right?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
I think, Armin, there were a couple of things. Not the one, but certainly the biggest regret I have is that I didn't meet him where he was. I tried to bring him to where I was, and I didn't try to play the Pokemon games with him, and I did a couple times, and he just would destroy me and cackle with glee. I wish I had gone more to where he was. But again, I kind of thought like, well, that's what is that what I should do? Is that what my role should be? And I didn't.
Plus, you're pretty busy at the time too.
Well, and that's another regret. But I think. I don't know if it's, rather than try to unlock the box, I just made this decision I was going to be a cheerleader, and I made sure I always was positive with him and smiled at him when I walked into the room or when he walked into the room, and that was pretty feeble in terms of a weapon, but it made me feel like I was doing something. Yeah.
I just, not to spend too much time here, but you found a passage on his computer. I am in isolation from everyone and a silent speaker. And God, it makes it so easy to second guess yourself as a parent. Why didn't I see this? Why didn't I know this? How come? I mean, how much did you beat yourself up over this stuff and second guess your stuff? Because we're always, as parents, second guessing everything we do half the time.
That passage, was that the seventh grade? Was that the seventh? Yeah, that was it. He wrote something in seventh grade English.
Yeah. But you're trying to find answers, and then the answer is, are there any right answers sometimes?
No, I'll be honest, Armin, and it would be very easy to go down that road of second guessing yourself. But I've sort of gave myself grace on that in the sense that, I second guess myself on interactions I have with my daughters now, and they are they're adults. The difference is I have ways to make amends with them. And it obviously, in that it didn't end, whatever these mistakes I may have made they're still around. But that, I think, circles to one of the other big points of the book, is that Max was sick.
Yeah.
And do I honestly think that if I had played more Pokemon with him that, he wouldn't have been mentally ill? Of course not. So, the acceptance, and it may be a get out of jail free card, as I said. I may just be, this is how I can rationalize not being in a fetal position for the rest of my life. But he was sick, and if he had died of cancer, you don't second guess your parenting
Exactly.
decisions.
Yeah.
Mental illness is an illness. My generation always hears the first word and doesn't hear the second word. And the second word is the important word there. He was sick. And, even the doctors the psychologists at RIT who were dealing with him couldn't, as he was in their care, couldn't save him. So, that I feel like that was, that's what happened. And, I just don't think it was my fault.
Yeah, no. To go back in time a little bit to the fateful night, Monday night, February 2015, you open the book, you're opening up a can of Progresso chicken soup, and the phone rings, and it's someone from the sheriff's office in Monroe County, New York. They can't even pronounce your last name correctly.
Well, I've had that issue for 63
years. Yeah, me too.
Years.
Try Katayan. Yeah. Try Armin Katayan. Yeah. Yeah. But, we talked about it. The trap door opens, and Meg is playing mahjong at a friend's house that night, and it's just it's a moment where I'm just like, holy shit,
Yeah.
What do you do now? And you have to call Meg and just, what is going through your mind, or is even anything going through your mind at that point in time?
Well, I think, when the adrenaline kicks in, your fight or flight, there's a lot going through. It's racing through, and I'm just thinking, okay, I've got to call her and get her to come home, but I don't want to tell her over the phone what happened. So I'm just call and said, you need to come home.
Life is full of choices. In this time, you had no choice.
No.
You got to make a call.
Well, I had to call her, and I don't want to say anything of any import over the phone. So, I finally, and I thought, well, maybe I could just wait until she got home, but that wouldn't have been really fair to her either. So that,
that starts it.
Yeah.
And in the case of you and Meg, it's like opposites attract, right? And
yeah.
Cornell, never lived outside the state of New York. You're the Mobile, Alabama, the Southern Jew. Think you're going to come back and raise a family in Alabama.
Yes.
I remember we were talking. You told me yesterday that when we met, you started dating Meg in the fall of '82.
We met in the fall of 82.
82.
We started dating in the following February.
That following February. So it's a 6-year courtship.
Whirlwind, 6 years.
Whirlwind.
Yeah.
Whirlwind.
Yeah.
But the difference is like, we were talking about how you handle grief too. It's like very, very different. And you have to, what did you learn from that in terms of how you have to be, we talked a little bit about it, but how you have to be aware of how, your spouse is dealing with this or not dealing with it, as the case may be?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we were just very willing to let one another handle it however we best needed to handle it. And, Meg needed to know everything, and I didn't. And, that was okay, and, I would just tease her and say, well, how hot was the stove when you put your hand on it today? But that's what she needed to do. And honestly, I didn't have the stomach for it. Again, pain avoidance, but I just didn't think it was, it wasn't like it was going to bring him back. So I didn't really, I didn't want to spend a lot of energy on it, and I thought you're just going to expose yourself to more pain, and it wasn't going to bring him back. So why do I need to know that?
But you said, Ivan, that Max's death, set off a transformation in you in so many different ways. How, in what ways, the more profound ways, or even the little ways, that you're different now, obviously, than you were back in 15 and February?
I think I think my priorities are better now. I'm certainly a more empathetic person. And part of it also, Armin, maybe, age, but I'm not all consumed with my career the way I used to be. I just have a better idea of what's important, or what I think is important is actually more important. It actually is important, in terms of emotions and dealing with people, and I think I have more gratitude for things than I used to. I'm certainly more aware of, I'm guaranteed nothing. And, one of the things my therapist, Deborah Belanger, who's been my therapist for a long time, but she said to me, right after Max died, this has nothing to do with Max dying, but you should be aware we are at the age where you're going to start losing people, and the pace will only accelerate. And I am a lot more aware of that. And I think it just changes a lot in how I deal with people now.
Did you have a moment, you had from August until the end of the year, January, with college football, you're on a conveyor belt that just doesn't stop, and it just, treadmills. We used to laugh about it at SI, treadmill, we just kept turning it up, see who would fly off, and then we could move up the masthead,
Yeah.
Oh, we lost him, that's too bad.
Meet
okay.
George Jetson.
Yeah. But was there a moment when you're covering a game, or you're writing a game story, or you're on the road and you just go, what the?
Why am I here?
Why am I here?
Oh, absolutely. And that, in an odd sort of way, Armin, I think that separation made me a better writer, because I'm not emotionally wrapped up in a game anymore.
Yeah.
I just kind of look at it and go, okay, that's what I need to write. What's the most important thing here? Write it, and go back to the Marriott. And how many Marriott nights do you have?
I had quite a few.
Yeah.
I didn't have them like the college football writers did, because I didn't travel like
I'm
you
around
did.
1,600.
Wow,
Yeah.
Jesus, that's,
Yeah.
I don't have anywhere near that.
Yeah, but it's really glamorous, let me tell you.
Yeah, it's a glamorous life.
Especially in college towns.
Oh, God. Tuscaloosa is actually quite nice, but you can pick some that you just don't want to go back to.
Yeah. That's another conversation.
Yeah.
But No, I think, in an odd sort of way, and again, there's so many ways I'm a better person, journalist, husband, father, and after Max died, and somebody said to me tonight, Don, that perhaps, that's to look at it, that's a gift
That's
from
a
Max.
gift. I was going to say that.
Yeah.
It's a gift from Max. It's kind of a, strange way to look at it, but,
Yeah,
that's
I think it's might be true.
might be true. That just the decision, suicide is like a word that people don't talk about. It's, oh, I'm so sorry. You've talked about that in the golf course. The first thing people say to you, oh, I'm so sorry. And you're just like, can you say something else, please, besides that? But just your decision to not just talk about suicide, but get to the forefront of it and open yourself. You talk about Red Smith, right? Open a vein and bleed all over something. And this is what you do here in this book. And it's an enormous risk in a lot of ways, I think, how you're perceived by other people, to put yourself out that way. I mean, how difficult was it for you to jump off of that diving board?
It was not that hard, Armin, because whatever awkwardness there was, I felt like if I wasn't honest in how I talked about Max, it was doing him a disservice. And I didn't want anything I did or anything I said to be interpreted as if we were ashamed of Max. Mm-hmm. And that might be that was certainly one of the first motivations I had in how are we going to handle this. And I thought, well, if you turn inward, because it's suicide, if you turn inward and you don't meet this where it is, then you are taking that stigma on. And, I just thought, I'm not doing that. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. We were proud of Max. We are proud of Max. He got sick. And, the sooner, and I'm not exactly Albert Schweitzer, but the sooner we as a society treat mental illness as an illness, and we're a lot better at it than certainly our parents were. We're not as good at it as our children are. Mm-hmm. And as I won't speak for all of y'all, as much as my generation has screwed up this world, our children do pretty good in how they treat each other and how honest they are about their emotions and their compassion for one another. And I think that was part and parcel of how I handled it.
I think it's fair to say many people in this room were at Max's memorial. Dee Dee and I were there. I walked into the church and it was packed to the rafters. I didn't realize until I read the book again that there were more than 1,000 people there from every walk of your life. I mean, we saw people from SI and ESPN and all the different things. And I'm just curious as to what you remember most. I mean, for me, your eulogy was astounding. I couldn't believe that you had that much, you were under that much control. And then, just for the people that didn't hear it, I mean, the Charlie Chaplin story, just, when you talk about, just when you think everything is going to go one way.
Yeah.
Maybe you could just remember a little bit, because it made a funny but a very powerful point.
Well, there's an anecdote I had read somewhere, and I don't know where it was, but the Charlie Chaplin, who was certainly a genius, he was filming, and he shows a guy and he shows a banana peel on the street, and and the camera goes back and forth, and to anticipate he's going to slip, and it's a pratfall, and of course we all laugh at that. And he gets to the banana peel and he hops around it very smugly and takes one step and fell into a manhole. And that's how good Charlie Chaplin was, but I felt like that was a perfect illustration of what had happened to us, that we had gotten Max to college, that we thought he was doing okay, and then boom,
Yeah.
we stepped into a manhole. And and again, that's just writing training.
Well, it's but you write about in the book about that you and Meg had clearly gone into avoiding the arms race, as you called it. You didn't want to live in New York City. You didn't want to send the kids to private school. You wanted so much to be normal, and to avoid all the social pressures.
Yes.
And then guess what?
Yeah. And I know I thought that was sort of karma just slapping us upside the head. But we were public school kids. We wanted our kids to go to public school, and they went in our neighborhood, and they got very good educations, and yay, Fairfield. I had a friend of mine in Mobile who also is a CPA said to me one time, man, says y'all's property taxes are high. I said, Jay, what do you spend a year on private school tuition?
Yeah.
He went, oh, okay. Yeah,
I see what you mean.
Yeah. So,
yeah. But you're like, why us? It's
Well,
like
yeah,
we've done everything right.
Exactly.
It's like, but guess what? Nobody's
didn't
keeping
matter.
score. It didn't matter.
No, and it, we thought we were the golden family. We were 55 years old, and well, Meg wasn't 55, I was, but sorry, and we had 3 wonderful children and a good marriage and a paid off mortgage and blah 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 and golden life, and then whammo.
Yeah. Another thing you wrote, I wrote it down today. You write about the awfuls. There's so many awfuls.
Yeah.
May never know awful. No longer have him awful. The emptiness awful. I'm going to fall apart awful. And you came to the very simple conclusion that's so hard to get to. Explain where you got to. And because to me it was like, well, that's another truth that comes out of the book.
Well, I think it's just, you again.
It is.
It is, and I kind of had to just understand that and be honest with myself, and being honest in the book was easy. And the reason I waited 5 years to write the book was I needed my legs under me, and as I said, I needed a perspective. But at the time, I remember thinking, is this something I want to write? Do I explain all this and how awful everything was? And I thought, well, again, I'm trying to bring people by the hand and say, this is what this felt like, and this is what I want you to understand. Not to scare you, because you're already scared of it. We're all scared of it, but just if you understand what this is like, it will help you either in dealing with it yourself or in comforting somebody who's dealing with it. Well,
you talk about understanding it. You described it not as a tornado, but as an earthquake that just like reverberates out.
Yeah.
And, it just keeps shaking things up. And I'm just wondering now, you write about when it was so hard for you to go to a grocery store and see stuffed Oreos, right? Things that Max loved.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine, seeing a Lego set or seeing something like that. How have you come to grips with that? So you have some balance and peace in your life in a way that you're not constantly
Well, you just kind of, your scar tissue is there. I mean, Meg and I drove home from Boston this weekend, and we stopped in a mobile station, and there's Nestle is now making Cinnamon Toast Crunch milk. Yeah, but, Max would have been all over that, and I just looked at it, and I don't know whether I said it aloud or not, but I just kind of was like, Max, I was like, hey, I wanted to tell him, hey, Cinnamon Toast Crunch milk, but that's the kind of thing, But I'll say this, Armin, one of the, your grief evolves, obviously, as your life changes. What I find interesting now is that I don't really, it's very difficult to conjure in my mind who Max would be at age 29. And that makes me sad, just to not be able to really know, who he would be. Because we see his sisters and, they are, on with their lives and their careers and doing great. And, but I don't really have there's no real frame of reference for, what he would be doing or, or who he would be.
Yeah, which leads me to my last question before I open it up to questions from the audience. Your daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, Meg is here, obviously. Just what you have to say about the courage and the strength that they've shown over the last 8 years and how they've helped you.
Well, we've all helped one another, and what we said to the girls was, you have to grieve. You don't care how you grieve, but you've got to get it out of your system, because if you don't get it out when you want it to, it's going to come out when it wants to, and that may not be convenient. But they have, the girls certainly each in their own way, have done remarkably well, and Sarah, as is her way, went straight. She read up on grief and immediately found a therapist. And Elizabeth didn't do that, but eventually, found a therapist. And Elizabeth is a much more private person. So I don't have any great detail to tell you about how she's doing, but can see that she's doing well. But they are, as I said in the book, they are the lighthouses on my shore, and of course, Meg is, in awe of her because she's stuck around me, for this long, but she's just she's held us all together, and it's fun to be with her.
Yeah. I'm going to open it up to any questions. Just raise your hand if you would stand up. I don't know if we have microphones here. I'll repeat the question, but feel free. We need one person to start it. So right in the middle there, ma'am. Yes. Yes, please. And I'll just repeat it just quickly because people are just the decision to stay in Fairfield, because I know you were talking about literally going to grocery stores like 2 towns over because you didn't want to go to the same gas station. So what was that like?
Oh yeah, the Big Y in Trumbull. Yeah, that was like my Disneyland. That's a good question. Our life was here, and I didn't feel the need we had ballast here, and we had friends here, and so much support and so much love here. I mean, the town of Fairfield, one of the best things about this book being chosen is that, in a way, all of I can thank everybody here again for all the support and love that was shown to us, and because there was a lot, but there are things that, you're right. I mean, the kids Max grew up with at Stratfield and at Ludlow Middle School and at Ward are getting married now and having children now. And, going to those weddings sucks. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, we go and it's a wedding and you're really happy for whoever it is that you're watching, but it just brings to mind that Max, we're not going to get this with him, and I hope our friends continue to invite us to their weddings. We'll still come.
They didn't suck that much. They were any others? Yes, ma'am, right there.
Oh, I didn't mean you at all.
I didn't mean that.
Yeah. Everyone else is.
When you're having a particularly hard day, I think I'm okay. You can hear me? When you're having a particularly hard day or a hard moment, is there a memory that you go to about Max or about your family that helps bring you out of that?
Hard day, memory of Max that helps you? They're asking better questions than I did.
Yeah,
I'm going to go sit in the audience.
That is a very good question. I think I think of watching Duck Soup with him, which is, and I think of watching Duck Amuck, which was our favorite Looney Tunes cartoon, and just seeing him bent over in laughter. Max loved Broadway, and he and I remember we went to see One Man, Two Governors with CBS late night James Corden. And I remember Max being literally bent over double laughing in the theater. He was really funny. It was a terrific play, but that's how I like to remember Max. And again, because that was kind of a way we connected. So he was funny.
Yes, ma'am.
Gift of your words and your articulate sharing of your journey to help us understand, and we all thank you for that. But when you talk about holding people's hands to try to help them understand, do you have something that you can share with young people, particularly Max's contemporaries, who may not have reached the maturity to be able to deal with grief and what to say to people? Is there something that you've learned through this that you would share with them?
I think we heard that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, especially with young people who may not be as mature, what can they do to deal with grief and help others deal with grief? Janet, I think that the the basic rules I think are effective. The basic rules I found would be effective. Could be or something they could handle. You can't fix it. You just be there. Listen. Don't say if there's anything I can do, please ask me, because that's just one more task for the person who's grieving. Just do it. Go rake their leaves, go walk their dog, bring them food. Brian Barlam and his son, shoveled our driveway one day. So I was upstairs and heard the noise, and I, just lifted the window up and said, "Get off my property."
But finish the job
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
get off. And don't forget the right up to the
you
steps.
missed the spot, yeah. No, I think, the Sheryl Sandberg's circle of grief theory that she wrote in Option B, there are concentric circles of grief. Figure out what circle you're in and comfort inward to the main circle, the most innermost circle being the immediate family, and then the extended family, and then the friends. Comfort inward. Don't ask for comfort inward. If somebody is really upset about Max, don't look to me to comfort you.
Yeah.
But it's mostly just a listening, and it's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. But it's one of the best ways to show friendship.
Yes, sir.
Two quick questions.
Here comes the microphone. Just one second.
How much of your middle of the night journaling ended up in the book? I'm curious, did you use that as kind of source material? How much in the book? And also, you're a professional writer, obviously very talented, gifted writer. What was the biggest surprise for you when you finished the book? Was there something that you wrote or something that you felt or that you learned that you weren't expecting when you sat down to do it?
How much of my journaling ended up in the book, and was I surprised at the finished product, any conclusion I came to in the finished product. And also, since I'm repeating this for everyone at home, he said I was a talented and gifted writer. So. Just being thorough. I think some of what appeared in the journal was more of a sort of a roadmap. Some of it did end up in the book, at least in a sort of a first draft form. Once I stopped the journaling, I began either on an anniversary or just when an idea popped into my head, I would write an essay and I'd post it on Medium. And those essays were more of the beginning of a skeleton of the book. The surprise in the finished product for me was that I actually made it to the word count that I made it to, but in a very natural, flowing way. And part of that may have been the pandemic. I didn't have any work to do, and I could sort of focus exclusively on this and pour all of my thoughts into this rather than try to juggle it while I was writing about Nick Saban. But it all just sort of came together very nicely. And the funniest, you will get a kick out of this, I signed the contract to deliver the manuscript on December 1st, and I finished it probably the second week in November, but I just held on to it just in case I wanted to tinker it. And tinker with it. In the morning of December 1st, I kind of looked at a couple things just to make sure, and right around noon, I sent it to him, to my editor, and the phone rings within a half an hour. He goes, "Oh my God!" I said, "What?" He said, "You delivered on time."
Nobody delivers on time.
Yeah. Well, I said, "Well, I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we roll." But he said, "Yeah,
authors are different."
Yeah. Now you tell me.
Yeah. Other questions? I'm looking in the audience here. Yes, right there. Yes, ma'am.
I'm loud enough. I don't need a microphone. So since we're at a library event and we're talking about a book you wrote, a lot of people, when they go through trauma or grief, turn to reading. You turn to writing. Some people turn to reading.
Are there any books that I read that either helped me or helped me to escape, momentarily by laughing? I found, Mary Ellen, the genre of memoirs in this sort of memoir not very helpful. Because and that says more about me than it says about the books. I just didn't, to me it was sort of yeah. I know what it feels like to have lost my kid, and that sounds way more cold and callous than I mean it. I just didn't. I don't remember anything that in a book that.
Was it Kessler that?
Kessler, I read some of. Now Meg, Meg read everything and is still reading, and she drew, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Meg, come on up here.
We'll just talk amongst ourselves. And you guys, no, Meg did read everything, and Meg drew great comfort from some, from some writers. I just, some of the books I picked up, and again, as I said, when I was trying to decide what I wanted to say was, this was my kid, and while I understand that motivation, I don't really, certainly that point, I didn't want to know about that person's child. That was just kind of, maybe there's something I'll think of, but that was kind of a dry well for me. And I figured that out fairly quickly.
Just last couple questions, if we have any others in the audience here. Yes, sir.
Did I ever convince my wife to get a dog? So you really don't want this marriage to last, do you?
They were doing so well.
Yeah. Well, each of our daughters got pandemic dogs, and they have been a wonderful substitute and a great compromise because they are like, as you know, grand dogs, grandchildren. So, in fact, our daughter in San Francisco is coming in Friday and then coming back at the end of April, and we are getting to keep her 8-pound dog for a month. And then Elizabeth is now in Manhattan, and her dog doesn't come up as much as we would like, but we go into New York to see him and her. So, in that order.
Last question. I'm going to take this woman right in the middle here.
Hello. It's more of an observation and a statement than a question. As a mother who also lost a child to suicide, I thank you for writing the book. No. My greatest fear was that my child would be forgotten. So congratulations, because Max will never be forgotten.
Oh, thank you. That's really sweet.
I think I'm going to close on that. I just want to say, Dee Dee and I have lived in Fairfield since 2011. We love it here, and one of the reasons we love it here so much is that this is an extraordinary community. And for this many people to show up on a night to listen to Ivan talk about suicide and grief is just remarkable. And I want to thank you. I know Ivan thanks you. But it's amazing to see this many faces here willing to work their way through so many issues that we have as parents, and no one as difficult as what Ivan and Meg went through. But thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it very much, and a round of applause for Mr. Maisel.
Thank you, obviously. Thank you so much. This was a dream for me that Fairfield would choose the book. And to your child being forgotten, there's in Judaism, as long as someone says your child's name, your child will be remembered. So think of that. But thank you.
I think Ivan's going to go out front
Yeah, well,
and sign books and stuff, so
Yeah.
let's adjourn. Thank you so much again for coming.